For a long time, you didn't tell anybody how your father actually passed away.
Yeah, my father died by suicide 7 years ago. And even my best friends did not know he died by suicide because the whole, like you mentioned, the shame and the stigma around suicide. And then recently, when my son took his life by suicide almost 2 years ago,
Yeah.
I initially wanted to go there. That's where I wanted. I wanted to just ignore it, not talk about it, stay in my room, never interact with anybody because of the shame and stigma. So that affected me twice.
Welcome, everybody, to Unleash Your Greatness. Today, I have a really special guest on. I'm really excited to have on because her message is so important for everybody to hear and understand. Her name is Lark Galley. She is an author, the author of Learning to Breathe Again, Choosing to Heal After Losing a Loved One to Suicide. She's also a speaker, and she's helping bring awareness to suicide and the stigma that is surrounded about it, and helping people to understand that there is a way to move on and heal from losing a loved one to suicide. So, Lark, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And Adam, I really appreciate the opportunity to share my message. I believe, just like you said, that bringing awareness around suicide is timely and critical because there are more people suffering with suicide ideation than ever before.
Absolutely. I think I heard a statistic the other day that it's gone up in the like to six or by 16% in the last, since this whole pandemic thing has been going on, and people are isolated and they're feeling, more or disconnected from
Yes.
loved ones.
And they're fearful and, uncertain about the future and just all of that uncertainty. But especially, like you mentioned, the isolation is a huge part of it.
Yeah, for sure. So I really want to thank you for willing to share your story and to bring awareness to this very tough topic that I think there is still this kind of stigma around it.
Oh,
And people don't
absolutely.
like to talk about it. And you even talk about that in your book. And I definitely want to get into your story. But you talk about how you weren't fully open to talking about it. And just so that everybody's aware, she is a two-time suicide survivor, which means that she's had two family members close to her take their lives. And the first one was your father,
Yes.
which you outline in the book amazingly. And I kept telling my wife, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened when she was so young, and then your childhood and all the things you dealt with. And I think it said you had moved by the time you were like 10, like I don't even know how many times. It was like,
by the time I was 16, it was over 30 times.
yeah.
And it was because my father suffered from undiagnosed depression and bipolar disorder, and we didn't know it until he was in his 50s. But once we figured out, looking back, you're like, oh yeah, that explains a lot.
Yeah. And so your father ended up taking his life, and I don't want to give everything away in the book because it is such a good read as far as like your journey through that whole process. But and you say in your book, for a long time you didn't tell anybody how your father actually passed away.
Yeah, my father died by suicide 7 years ago. And even my best friends did not know he died by suicide because the whole, like you mentioned, the shame and the stigma around suicide. And then recently, when my son took his life by suicide almost 2 years ago,
Yeah.
I initially wanted to go there. That's where I wanted. I wanted to just ignore it, not talk about it, stay in my room, never interact with anybody because of the shame and stigma. So that affected me twice.
Yeah. And I guess the beautiful thing about it is you really learned how to get through the pain when you did start to share. And you're very open about that in your book, as how much healing that occurred when you did start to share with people what happened to your son, and then consequently as well to your father after it happened to your son. And this is still relatively time wise still fairly fresh.
Yes, it's not been 2 years yet.
Yeah. like that's amazing that you're out there sharing your message when this is still such a fresh thing that most people, I mean, it takes, and I'm not saying that you're over it, but it takes a long time for a lot of people to get through this. And I'm sure you still have your days where it's hard and you think of, shoulda, coulda, woulda type things, looking for signs or whatever. But I think the book really outlines very beautifully the relationship and kind of this struggle you had with your son, as well as the healing that happened after. And there's a lot of, you share some beautiful things in that book. And again, I don't want to ruin the whole book because I want people to go and buy it and read it. But some spiritual things that happened to you, things that happened through other people, messages that your son left you, and that he really wanted you to understand that he did care and love for you. And even though you did butt heads a lot
Oh,
when
yes.
you were going through,
And
uh,
that, and that was part of the message. I mean, my book is really raw. I don't try to sugarcoat anything. And I'm just like, this is the failures, in my earlier life, from my parents, as a parent, what I wish I could have done differently. And part of this message is to parents who are struggling with their children. This doesn't have to be a book just for people whose child has died or a loved one has died by suicide. This is for parents who are struggling in their relationships, because that was me and my son. Every day, this very brilliant boy would argue with me. And he
right.
was usually right. And I was just like, please, just no more arguing. And so it wasn't like a close knit beautiful relationship. It was a struggle. And sometimes those relationships that are the hardest are the ones that are there to help us improve the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I, and every time I thought that things couldn't get any crazier in your book, something would happen and it would get crazier. And between your growing up life, moving so many times, dealing with your father's bipolar and depression, and I mean, to Tennessee, to California, to I'm trying to remember all the places he took you
Oh,
guys
yes.
for all these little adventures, he would call them, right?
Yes.
It's time for an adventure. And um, it's just crazy. And then dealing with so much for such a young person to deal with what you went through, living in small apartments in cramped quarters with what it was
Nine. There are nine of
nine,
us.
yes, nine of you, seven kids and your parents, and it's just it blew me away. And
What the
then
interesting part about that is, one of my neighbors, who is also an editor for me, she's a professional editor. She's known me for a while, but of course, most people don't know the whole backstory.
right,
And she said, Lark, I was so shocked to hear about your childhood. And she said, I cried because it was so abnormal and just crazy. And here's the crazy part. I said, really? It was that crazy? Because if you don't know anything different, that's normal to you, right? And
sure,
so I knew it was unusual, but it wasn't until I started getting people's reactions that, like, oh, it was crazy.
yeah, yeah, I was blown away. I mean, you start out the book. Obviously, you start out the book at a very poignant time when you find out about your son's death. But then you start getting into your childhood and you talk about your mother being pregnant and they didn't have the money to go to the doctor till she was 7 months. And then she goes to the doctor and says, hey, this is different than my other pregnancies. I think there might be twins. And he's like, nope, there's triplets. And like, oh my gosh, here's this woman 7 months pregnant with triplets and just going and doing her thing. Like she just has to keep pushing forward
Yeah.
and moving. Like you say, like you just didn't know any different. So that was like
Exactly.
your experience. And uh, it just, I'm telling you, like I read the book and it's something that could be made into a movie. It's crazy. Um, so, but it had so many deep meaning and messages in there about, loving your kids and loving them for who they are, because
Right.
your son, he was a very unique person. He had a
Mhm.
very unique personality, from what it sounds like, as he's described in the book. He took on a lot of very alpha male when your husband is away for military deployments and things, and that was a big struggle for your relationship. Yeah, he had all these amazing qualities. He was gifted in music, piano, the guitar, very logical, very mathematical, and he was going to school to be an engineer at the University of Utah when the whole taking his life happened. And so, obviously, a very smart young man.
And
And
not one that you would think was struggling or had problems. And that's another point I want to bring up, is that so many people who do take their lives, they look like everything's going well in their lives. And that's the facade that we often portray. Whereas behind the scenes, there's a lot of self-doubt and questioning and wondering if, does it even matter? Is life even worth it?
yeah, absolutely. And I found it really interesting when the morning that he ended up taking his life, you woke up and you said, "Oh, I noticed the garbage had been taken out, and all the things you usually argue with him about doing were done." And then you pointed out that people who are ready to take their life often will, uh, you know, close all those loops, if you will.
Yes.
They'll do all the things so that they feel like they're not leaving any loose ends, and yet they are.
Yes.
Like, they're
There's
leaving.
so much that all the why questions that are left behind. Why did this happen? Or why wasn't I enough to help save him? Why didn't he, come and talk to us, etc.? All of those, and all that happens after the suicide, it's almost debilitating, on the part of those who are left behind.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. Um, it really is quite mind boggling to think that all the pain that someone leaves behind, that they probably don't really consider. I mean, they're probably like, well, I hope people maybe will feel a little remorse for me, but I don't think they fully understand. And obviously they're in such depth of despair that they feel like nobody cares,
Well,
probably.
and not only that, but a lot of them feel that they're a burden, to their family, and that their family would actually be better off without them, which is not the case.
Yeah. So, sorry, you're bringing up a little bit of
Oh,
emotion in me.
yeah.
um, because that's exactly, there was a time in my life, and where I was considering taking my life, and actually there was a very poignant moment where I was ready to do it. I had a plan. I was in our bedroom. I was ready to act on that plan, and it was exactly that. Like you said, I felt like I was letting my family down. I felt like I was not the father, the husband, uh, the man that I was supposed to be for everybody, and or even the son. I felt I was letting my parents down. I mean, I was a 30 something year old man, and like, I'm letting my parents down. And um and you're exactly right. Lots of times people in that state of mind, they just feel like, you know what, the world would be better without me because I'm a burden. I am
Yes.
nothing. And it really is sad. And for me personally, luckily I had an experience, and I do consider a spiritual experience that pulled me out of that at that moment. Um, and you had a similar you had similar sparks of inspiration in your book as well. I remember when the time when you were walking down the hall in the book, and there was the voice that came to
Yes.
you and said, "Hey, you need to," and I'm trying to remember
Oh,
exactly what
yes.
the voice said.
Well, it was when he was about 16, and of course, it just got worse as he got older. At
Right.
16, he's just arguing all the time and belligerent to me. Very nice boy to everybody else, but not mom. And I'm thinking about what I call my favorite topic to obsess over every day. I'm thinking about, all the conflict that he's creating in my life as I see it. I'm walking down the hall, and this voice just said to me, he's not the problem, you are. And it stopped me, because I'm like, well, what do you mean I'm the problem. How can I be the problem, right? I'm the parent. I know what's right here.
Yeah.
And like literally this like picture opened up in front of my face, and I just saw my son and me before we came to earth. And he said, Mom, you're going to have a lot of trouble being Christ-like, but I am going to help you. And it changed the way I started to interact with him. So we got a little bit better between then and when he died. But I would say that dealing with my son and trying to cope with the suicide has changed who I am at the cellular level. I would say
Yeah.
I'm more compassionate, more understanding, less judgmental. If that is what needed to happen in order for me to become a better person, then I feel like my son has accomplished his mission in helping me be able to get on the right path, so to speak.
Yeah. Beautiful. And, there's so many, so many emotions in all of that. And especially for me, because like I said, I had my own spiritual experience where, I don't consider it a voice per se, but a thought came to my head when I was in that moment, that darkest moment in my life, where it was, what would your family do without you? What would your wife and kids do without you? And I know I'm not the first person to stop doing something stupid because of the thought of their family, but it really did change my perspective on things. And luckily, I didn't go through with that, but that's not the case for so many people. And
Right, exactly. And I look at, where you were before and now where you are now, and you're helping people, you're trying to bring light and awareness to them. I had three different coaches in my life who came into my life at different times who helped me through when I was struggling or had a hard time and needed help. All three of those people had at one time planned out their suicide years ago. And I think if they had gone through with it, just like if you had gone through with it, then where would I have been when I needed them? When they were instrumental in my life, they would not have been there.
yeah,
And that's why it's so important. Sometimes we're struggling and we can't see our value. We can't see that we're making a difference in anyone's life. And yet, if we are willing to just hold on, just stay in the game, even when it hurts and it's hard, we are going to be that person that can change someone else's life. And we are so interconnected. I realize that now more than ever.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Uh, and such a beautiful, beautiful way to look at it, because obviously a tragedy that your son left and is no longer with you. But um, actually, I want to just real quickly, I want to focus on that, because you in the book you do state that he is still with you.
Yes.
Sure, his body, his physical body's not there, but you do still feel him in your life. You still uh, take steps to remember him, and he even spoke, you know, not directly to you, but in ways to let you know that you are still around, or he is still around when you're thinking of him. And that was beautiful, that the fact that you are able to understand and see that in your life. And
And that's what being able to share his story has brought me closer. And I think it's helped him understand me and what I was trying to accomplish as a parent, and it's helped me understand him and what he was struggling with, and his regrets and what he wished had been different. And I know that he's very happy and proud that I'm able and willing to sort of take on this very difficult role of talking about suicide prevention. It's not something that I wanted to do. It's not something that I ever saw myself doing, but it was something that I realized very quickly after my son died that it was needed, because so many people struggle. I found out after he died that suicide is the number one killer of youth in Utah, where we live, and it's the number two killer of youth nationwide. And as a parent, I said, I have always tried to parent well, and I've tried to help my kids and warn them when things were difficult, but I didn't know. If you knew what the number one killer was of, your child, don't you think you would want to warn them and help them, and yet I didn't even know this. And that's what my message to parents is wake up. Do not be like I was, very complacent, thinking suicide was outside. It was not in my home, even though my father had died by suicide. And I think how naive I was to think some of those thoughts.
Yeah. And that really is a staggering statistic that it is the number one in Utah and number two in the nation of you know the
Yeah, and the sad part
yeah.
is they didn't have to die. That's what hurts so much.
And I think that so many people, I for one, I haven't had a close like a son or daughter. Well, I don't have any sons, but any daughters or family members that are really close. I've had two cousins actually within a week of each other that took their own lives at one time. I also have had my daughter, my oldest daughter, had a really good friend at school last year who ended up taking his own life, and it was just kind of the same thing. It was really sad because he came to school. His family had just come home from an awesome vacation from Disneyland, and he came to school and he had bought all these little kind of keychains and stuff for his friends, and he came around and he gave it to my daughter and said, "Hey, I got this for you at Disneyland. I just wanted to give it to you." And she was like, "Oh, thank you." And she was kind of running late for her class, so she's like, I'll talk to you later, thanks so much." And she hustled off, and then she never got a later. And because that was kind of his way of tidying things up before he ended up taking his life that same day.
Mhm.
And it's really sad to think that there's such a pandemic. We're focused so much on this COVID pandemic, but there's a bigger pandemic that is even more of a problem that we need to focus on, and that is really teen suicide or suicide in general. It's not just teens.
Exactly.
Let's be
Right.
clear. Like teens is a huge problem, but right now, especially, so many people are suffering
It's
from.
moving more into the young adult category now, and you can imagine being in your early to mid 20s, and with this pandemic going on, all your plans, maybe career or school, it's just gotten thrown up there, and things that you were counting on. And where is my foundation, and how can I plan? What can I do? There's all this uncertainty and fear. And so as parents, we need to create that stability for ourselves and our children, to help them through it, but also to help them understand that they can talk to us about anything. What are they struggling with, and not to judge them. Just yesterday, I was with a family member, and she admitted that she had been struggling with depression. Obviously it runs in our family, and she admitted it had been struggling with depression for months now, and she was seeing a therapist, but still just struggling, and once again having those feelings of, is life worth it? Maybe I should just check out. I'm a burden to my family. And I'm so grateful for two things. Number one, that I happened to reach out to her and just check in.
Yeah,
Number two, that she was willing to tell me what she was struggling with. Because sometimes we do that. We say things are fine, and we put a smile on, and they're not fine. And if she hadn't been willing to tell me that she was struggling, I would not have been able to like go deeper with her.
yeah, yeah. And it's absolutely amazing that you were doing this work. And so I I want to kind of ask you a few questions because I know you've done a lot of work in this area, a lot of research, and a lot of um,
I would say
just
soul searching more than anything
yeah,
else.
yeah, soul searching. But you really have become a big advocate for helping in this area. And I know you and I we talked about a week or so ago, and you brought up the fact that there's cyclical moments when people kind of feel this urge to want to end their life. And some of those times, and just so we can bring more awareness to those times, it's usually in the fall to winter or winter to
Oh,
spring
spring. Yeah.
time
Right.
frames. And so um, we want to be, as parents or somebody who even suffers from it ourselves, be aware of that and be like, okay, what's going on? Let me check in
Yes.
with ourselves or with our children and say, why is this happening? and then look for the signs. And sometimes the signs are so subtle.
Or a lot of times the signs in teens look like normal teen behavior, right?
Right.
Just they're crazy, they're hormonal and all of that. But it has to do with maybe just checking in as far as like, um, what what are your biggest struggles, or what was, when they're dealing with school, what was the best thing that happened to you today, what was the worst thing that happened to you today, so that you're doing two things: you're opening the door to have some communication,
Yeah.
and you're also looking in to see if they have highs and lows, how are they dealing with those. The worst thing that can happen is that you sort of flatline, because if you flatline emotionally, it's not too long before you want to flatline physically.
Yeah.
And so these are ways that we can engage with our kids, with other people that we come in contact with. I was just thinking about this the other day with the pandemic. Sometimes the only time I get outside is when I go to get the mail, and that's not good, right? That's not taking care of myself. And so I've really decided that I need to get out a little bit more, get outside, in nature, feel the sunshine, because that's one thing, that a simple thing that can help us with our moods and to feel better through the winter months. Sometimes we get that, the sads, where it's seasonal disorder. But you mentioned like the season, you would think the holidays is the big trigger for suicides, and that's not always the case. It's usually, like you mentioned, springtime or fall time with college students. And it was spring for my son. It's often right around midterms, because they
Stress.
they're facing that, they're under a lot of stress and pressure. And the other thing too that I've learned is that sometimes people are so depressed, like through the winter months. This is ironic, but they're so depressed they can't go through with killing themselves, which is so sick and wrong, right?
Yeah.
And then they start to feel a little better, and then they're like, okay, now it's time to go. My adult daughter, she's 24, her friend from high school just took his life last week.
Oh,
And so you're into end of January, right? And he made it through the holidays with his family, and okay, got that all done. We did the Christmas thing, had Christmas dinner with mom and dad, and then just not wanting to carry on and to move forward. And so
yeah.
here's something that his parents probably didn't see coming. And so how do we have those conversations? How do we let our family members know, what are you struggling with? I want you to know that, you know grades are not the most important thing. It doesn't matter, whatever the situation is, you taking care of yourself is the most important thing. And how can I support you in that?
And another point that you kind of mentioned it real briefly, but is to leave those communications open and make them feel like you can come and talk to me about anything, whatever the problem is, right? Like if you're dealing with, and I think book uses examples. I got this girl pregnant, or I'm coming out as gay, or different things like that. If we don't, as parents, allow for that open communication, for some as a parent, I know there's times where I shut my kids down over talking about some of the silliest things. Like, I don't want to talk about you not wanting to get your pajamas on right now. Like,
Right.
right.
That's not an
Um,
option.
and it's just so silly. But at the same time, as parents, we get frustrated at those little arguments and things like that. And I think as our kids get older, they feel like, well, if I can't talk to my mom or my dad about this little thing, then how am I going to bring up these bigger issues that happen in life? And so that's really important to keep those lines of communication open. And it's a balancing act, right? It's so hard as a parent. I still, I've got 5 daughters, and they range from 19 to 7. And so we've got the older ones that communicate so differently than the little 7-year-old, the twins that we have that are 7. And it's it's this balancing act of, what I got to pick my battles. I've got to, figure out how to not shut them down so they don't want to tell me things that are bothering them. When I don't know. And you probably know better because of your research and soul searching, but what kind of advice could you give to a parent in those situations to not make sure we're doing that?
This is something that I've come to realize in the last couple of years, is that a lot of times we as just humans, we would prefer to go through life with what I call blinders on. We
Yeah.
would rather think that everything's fine, that our kids are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, what what we think they're supposed to do, and we don't really want to know or see what's really going on behind. And I had my blinders ripped off, just about before my son passed away about certain things. And I had to analyze that. And I thought, would I rather not know the truth about certain things about my children and assume things? Or is it better to know the truth, even though that truth might not reconcile with what I would hope this perfect life would look like? And I came to the conclusion that blinders pulled off, it's hard. It's like a band-aid getting pulled off, right?
Yeah.
But in the end, because of the relationship, it's better to know the truth and to allow your children to have that open communication. And so uh, this is what it looks like now for me. And this is not what it looked like before my son passed away. My youngest daughter was at military training. She's in the Guard, like her dad was in the Guard. She
Uh-huh.
came home from her training, and within a month, she ripped off her sock and said, "Look at this cool tattoo, on her side of her foot." And I thought, well, okay, it's the mountains. You love the mountains. That's very nice. And it could always be worse. It could have been across her forehead, but
Right.
it was down on her foot where most people would never see unless she didn't have shoes on. And so what was interesting though is that 2 years ago, I would have really been kind of upset about that, thinking, this is not something that we do. We don't put marks on our bodies, etc. And I just eliminated that because it wasn't my choice. It wasn't my body. It wasn't something that I would necessarily choose to do, but that was her choice. And just allowed it without feeling anything negative inside or saying anything to her reproachfully. And I thought that's interesting because 2 years ago, that's not the way I would have reacted. And so we need to understand that, we allow our children to make their choices. They have to go through consequences of those choices.
Sure.
But if we can be there to support them as a parent, that's our role. It's to love them no matter what and to support them through. Sometimes as teens, they make stupid decisions, right? And if we can just help them navigate that, or if honestly it's your daughter comes to you and says, "Dad, I'm pregnant," you know, that's the time where you really need to do some soul searching and have some ideas of how you're going to react. Is it going to be screaming, yelling, not in my house type thing? Or is it going to be, um, that's not the choice we would have wanted for you, dear, as a teenager,
Yeah.
but what what are your plans? How can we support you? According to what you're feeling like you can do to support her. She's already made certain decisions that aren't the best, and screaming and yelling is not going to help the situation.
Yeah. So such great insights that you're sharing. And I think there I guess in the book it brings up this moment where your son does share something with you. You've taken him to a therapist because your husband was seeing signs of suicide and things with his little interviews he'd have with them, right?
Right.
And so he comes out from the therapist, and the therapist basically says, "Do you want to tell her? Or do you want me to?" And he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'll tell her."
And
And
I'm very curious. I can't imagine what it is.
right, and he says, "I don't believe in God. I don't think I believe in God." And your reaction was, "Okay, I and I think he says something along the lines, I believe in science, not God, or
Right,
something, right?"
right,
And you said,
exactly.
"I believe that science is God." And you kind of said, I understand, where you're coming from. I respect your belief. And you weren't like overly like reactive to it, which I think
Right.
is um it's good that you were able to um understand that and see his perspective at that time. But there is, for some reason, it took him going to a therapist, right?
Yes, yes.
And he
And
thought you were going to overreact, but you
yeah,
didn't.
I did it, which he was looking at me like waiting for me to yell at him, and I didn't, which I think surprised him. And I'm just like, son, I can't make you believe in anything, right? you find your own way and you got to do what's right for you. But I would think, especially in a household that's fairly religious, like our household is, where we've raised our kids a certain way. I mean, his name was Christian, for Pete's sake, right? Um, that we need to be willing to accept where our kids are going, and even if their journey is not the journey we might want them to have. I'll just say this, for a child who at that time, when this was 16, so this was 3 years before he died, he was probably the child that I would have considered farthest away from God. And now, having gone through the suicide and have what I believe is a change of heart on his side, and having, like you said, those messages
Yeah.
to me from other people, from him, I believe that he's the closest child I have to God. And so I just have to say, whatever journey that your children are on, that they sort of need to take in life, that we don't always have the answers, and we just sort of need to allow and not control.
Yeah. Um, so beautiful and well said. And I just, I guess as a parent, number one, I honestly, I can't even imagine what it's like to have that happen, and your husband to find him that morning, when it all took place, and the grief that you must have felt. It's still feeling, I'm sure,
It
even
comes in
today.
waves.
Yeah. And probably you have those moments where it's, I think you talk about the time when it's his birthday
Yes.
after, and you all decide you're going to go grieve in your own way on his birthday instead of coming together and sharing his memory and stuff. You all decide to separate as family, and to kind of mourn in your own way, and be alone with your thoughts and feelings. And
That was the first year, so it was 6 months after he died. I wanted to get together as a family. That's normally what we do. It's a family birthday. We come together. The other members of the family, they were not in a place where they could do that, and so they all intentionally like did their own thing that day, and just sort of, the older daughter took a hike, and she spends time with my son when she hikes, and she talks to him a lot when she hikes, and they all had to go their different ways. Fortunately, last year, so it would have been a year and a half after my son's death, we were able to get together. We were
um,
able to just at least be together for that day, which was good.
yeah, that's awesome. And I want to, I guess, I love in the book when you share some of the moments people have come up to you and say, your message has meant so much. Uh, the parents, you said that they were friends of your son's Christians, and after it happened, they swore to their parents that they would never, even though they had
Yes.
in the past thought about taking their life, they would never take their life.
Or one even had attempted, yes. Getting these messages and letters from people where my message has had such an impact on them that they have said, I will not choose to take my life. I understand now how it would affect those I leave behind.
Yeah.
I understand that I am important and I have value. And that's the most rewarding thing for me, is to see that my willingness to talk about a hard topic
Yeah.
has changed people's lives. And that's why I do it. It's a life mission now.
Yeah, for sure. And that's exactly what I was going to get to, is by you sharing your story, it's allowing these people who have considered or are considering taking their life to see, it's not a only me problem, right? It leaves a ripple effect of heartache and pain. And do I really want to leave that with my family and have them go through that? And so it's amazing that you're reaching people in that way just by sharing your story and Christian story, because it's not just your story, right? It's a mix of both of you, and he's definitely a big part of that. And so I'm so grateful that you're making that impact and allowing people to say, you know, it's not just about me, and I will cause problems for my family. And So thank you so much for doing that. I want to just in the last little bit that we have together, just kind of pick your brain, and if you were to say what the top signs that you want to look for when you're thinking that maybe your child, your teenager is thinking about suicide, what would be kind of the top signs that you think are most important to look for?
I would say, when there's been an incident like 3.5 years before my son died, he expressed that he was feeling suicidal.
Yeah.
And we took him to the therapist, like you mentioned. He went 2 months and then he said, Mom, I'm good. I don't need to go back. I never had another conversation about his mental health after that. So if you have had a child in the past who's expressed some kind of, struggle or suicide ideation, feelings of not feeling self-worth, then absolutely follow up, stay in touch. Even now with my girls, uh, how's it going? What's going on? How are you feeling? And when I say that, there's a lot more behind it than just, how are you today, dear? I'm looking and I really care. I'm wanting to see them. And then also find out how their relationships are going. Did they have a breakup with a boyfriend, girlfriend, or maybe their best friend, they had a falling out? How's it going with the whole social media thing is huge, and we cannot parent like we were parented,
Yeah.
because our kids are dealing with things that we have no clue about. So think about in high school, when, like, the most embarrassing moment in high school for you,
Yeah.
maybe 5, 10 people knew, right? Not very many.
Right.
If something happens to your kids, junior high, high school, you can bet that probably 1,000, 5,000 kids can know within just a couple hours.
Or
Oh,
or someone records it and
yes.
puts it
And
on
it's,
the internet
yes,
and it's there forever, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And these are things our kids deal with. And as an adult, I couldn't deal with that, right? How can
Yeah.
our kids deal with this? And so there's checking in with them with that, helping them understand how they might contribute to bullying or feelings of inadequacy in other people, and also to check in and help them understand that their worth and their value is not based on likes and is not based on all of that. But that's a huge dynamic that, as parents, our this generation that we are with these younger kids, we have no clue the pressures that they're going through, and just to help them and understand where they are in life. Because um, as a younger person, we might have had a job, we might have been involved with sports, working on our grades, family chores, right? But we didn't have all of these other pressures. And a lot of times we as parents put so much pressure on our child. They have to be, first chair in orchestra, and they have to be the captain of the football team, and they have to, be the best looking kid and top honors. Who can do that? That's crazy, right? And I'm just saying that it would be better to have a healthy child who knows you love them no matter what, than to have a star athlete who sees no hope and takes their life.
Yeah. I agree. And to just have that unconditional love for them in a place of uh you've talked a little bit about spirituality and religion, but just have that Christ-like love, if you will, for them, and meet them where they're at instead of
Mhm.
trying to push your expectations onto them. That doesn't mean that you can't motivate them to try to be better or to do things, but to accept them and meet them where they're at and love them unconditionally for sure. So thank you for sharing that. Um, I always like to wrap up my the interviews I have with people by asking what would you say someone needs to do to unleash their greatness. But I want to change it a little bit for you because this is such a different topic than just helping people, unleash greatness. Although that is a part of what I think we're talking about, I want to change it a little bit and say, for those who are struggling and listening to this podcast and are struggling with thinking of suicidal thoughts, what would you say to them directly? Like, I mean, you are talking to that person. What would you say?
I would say that right now where they are, and I've been there when it's been dark and you really saw no way out, please get help, talk to someone, and just know that there are ways you can find help, because sometimes when somebody's in a dark place, they will do anything to stop the pain. That's what they're looking for. There are things that you can do, you know, medications if it is, or getting more sunshine, or changing your environment, changing some things in your life, having an honest conversation with someone that can get you in a better place. And you need to understand that if you can just hang on and realize that your life is so valuable, and so many people are depending upon you, in the sense that, not in a negative way, but in a sense that what you do impacts them more than you ever know. At my son's funeral, we probably had 300 people there. Most of them were kids.
Yeah.
He impacted more people than he ever knew. And he was very outgoing and kind and loving, and he made a difference in a lot of people's lives. And if he could have only seen how many people looked up to him and valued who he was as a person, I know he would have made a different choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And he's still making an impact through you sharing his story with others, and those that were impacted by his life are also sharing his story, because I guarantee that there's people who knew him, know of his suicide, and they hear of someone else struggling with it, they're sharing his story and saying, you need to hold on, you need to push forward and keep going. So sorry, I'm getting a little emotional with the thoughts of so many young people going through that. But
But it's true. I mean, and you look at your children and you think, uh, could one of them be struggling?
yeah, yeah, I ask myself that quite regularly, and I strive to check in with them. And I take the dog for a walk every day, and I'll invite him every once in a while, like, hey, do you want to come on a walk with me? And just check in, spend some time, just me and them, talking with
And
them.
that's
And
beautiful. And I would say give my book to your kids. Maybe not the 7 year olds, but
sure,
pretty much all the other ones. We think, oh, we need to shelter and isolate our children from these crazy things, but I think there's nothing in there that I think it's for sure. A 13-year-old plus could watch it. I've also known of an 11-year-old who it was read to him, and he was fine with it. So it's meant, there are some things that are pretty startling, but it's meant to sort of wake people up and say, oh, that could happen to me, or I've been feeling this way, and help them understand that they can make a difference. So talk to your kids and share with them, because they are struggling. They might not always tell you they're struggling, but they are struggling.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Thank you for sharing that. And I think those who are listening, please, please, please take that advice and spend some time with your kids and asking them open-ended questions, and how are they doing, and how are you feeling, and things like that. So, um, in closing, I just want to quickly have you. So, I have a copy of the book that you sent me, Learning to Breathe Again. And who or where can people get a copy of this book? A website, Amazon? Where's the best place to get a copy for those who are interested in reading the full story, which is amazing, by the way? I loved it. Where can I get a copy?
So I would just say, you can go to my website, larkgalley.com. There's a link to my book there, as well as on Amazon. And there's a tab that shows resources. So Lark's resources, because as I was sharing my story with people, parents would say, well, that's great. Now what do I do? And I'm thinking, I don't know, now what do you do? So I started to put some resources on there for parents. And one is a resource with Dr. Jenkins, who has a great platform. And we have a little video that talks to parents, and they can see, how can I get parenting tips? What can I do? And maybe if someone's feeling suicidal, they can take some classes on that suicide ideation. What can I do to snap out of that one? So there are some things on there that I'm just trying to bring awareness to people and saying that this is a critical topic. Honestly, in life, there are so many things. We get busy with life,
Yeah.
but busy is not the same as critical, and this is critical.
Agreed. And thank you for sharing those resources. That's awesome that you've got those out there. And for anyone, and I'm assuming, I'm just taking a stab in the dark here, that you are willing to share your message on stages or in front of groups so that they can you can share more of what you've gone through and Christian's story. For those
Absolutely.
people who want to get in contact with you, is your website the best place to reach out and say, hey, I would love to have you as a speaker? Or
Yep. So on my website, there is, some info about me, and then you can click on the button there that goes to my email. Email is also lark@larkgalley.com, but you can contact me from that website.
fantastic. So for those listening, if you want to get a hold of Lark and get her to speak to an audience and share her message, which is fantastic, and helping so many people deal with either losing someone to suicide, or if they're thinking of possibly suicidal thoughts, then she can help bring awareness to that. And so reach out to her on her website. I will make sure to put links below this episode so people can also find those very easily and get in touch with you and reach out if they feel that they could use some help getting
Great.
more awareness. So Lark, I appreciate your time and sharing your message, sharing your story. It's again, I was blown away by the story. I just could not believe the twists and turns that happened. Every time I didn't think anything else could blow me away, something else would.
Yeah.
And and again, I didn't want to bring up everything, even though I wanted to talk about it because it was such a fascinating story. I didn't want to ruin it for everybody who can go get a copy. So thank you
Thank you,
so much.
Adam.
Thank
Thank
you for
you.
being on the show and for doing what you're doing, like sharing yours and Christian's story and your family's story. It's not just about the two of you, it's your whole family. And you did bring a lot of that into the book and their grief and what they had to go through as well. And so I'm so appreciative that you're sharing it and bringing awareness to this very critical pandemic that we have and are suffering with our youth. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And everybody, I want you to have a wonderful day. Go out there and live your life and never give up. Just keep pushing. Tomorrow is a new day. The sun will rise again. And don't ever forget that. And have an amazing, amazing day.